We all want to know where we come from. What are our origins? Well, today on the show, we have a guest, and her name is Debbie Solaris. And she can read Akashic records and tell us exactly that, what our origins are. And I'm very excited to speak to Debbie because I'm wondering where my history's from based on my abilities and so forth. And excited to have you on, Debbie. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, and thanks for being willing to work with my crazy schedule because I know it gets crazy.
No worries. You've been in this, I say, section or realm or space for a long time, spiritual space. And, one thing that really bothers me, that gives me a headache, is the Disney movies, because I think that this is something I was explaining the other day is, if you understand creation, you can get to an answer quicker. And if you understand that there's only one fundamental part that was taken out of the equation that started this unbalance. And for some reason, people have a hard time understanding that. And you can't fault what people don't know. And when I say that is, if there's one piece of the puzzle that's foundational, the removed from this human experience that's created this unbalance, and all we have to do is plug this other piece back in, the other 1/3 piece, to get this aligned the right way. And people get into this life where this is all they know, and they make these decisions based on this unbalance. So I guess when I say Disney movie, it's a little accentuated. It's just how people are telling their story. So I feel like I've been brought into this space to kind of normalize the narrative to some extent, because this woo-woo, this wow verbiage and storytelling to me gives me a headache. And I'm like, why are we doing this?
Well, I think there's definitely a cult aspect to even new age, information. I think that's kind of a human tendency to latch on to a series of beliefs and maybe create a cult around it or create a whole identity. And when actually our identity is we're also shards of source. There's no good way of doing things and bad ways of doing things. It's all kind of balanced. It's, I think, a need for an equal amount of dark as there is light. That's my belief, anyway. And that's why I believe, that a lot of us, the trials and tribulations of our stories are just as important as maybe the light and bright, sunshine and butterflies aspect. So when you refer to Disney movies, I think Disney has a tendency to really emphasize the light and bright, even though the industry itself that it comes from is very, very dark. And so there's underlinements of dark, but it's like they almost try to hide it, throughout these stories, So there's always like a hero's journey. And that's mainly, I think, what I focus on when I do an Akashic reading for somebody is what is their journey? What is it that their soul chose to learn throughout a multitude of incarnations, whether it's on Earth or off planet? And what's their hero's journey? What is it that they're trying to accomplish through all of these different experiences? So I feel like the Disney movies only give like a very kind of superficial viewpoint on that, whereas there's very different nuances. It's all kind of black and white, like we have evil people, then we have, the good people or the heroes, but in all actuality, even the heroes have quite a bit of dark aspects about them. So I don't know if that answers your question per se, but that's how I see it.
Well, it does to some extent.
Yeah.
I mean, we have the production of a Disney movie, but I think that has somewhat set up a stage for the many Disney movies that people tell based on what they do in the spiritual space.
Yeah. I agree with that.
How do we ground that? Because I feel like I'm here to ground that situation.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of some of these fairy tales because, like I said, they only tell like one side of the story. Oftentimes, there's many different nuances to a lot of people's stories, a lot of human stories. And that's what I love about working with the Akashic records, because that's, one of the main things I work with is the Galactic Akashic records. You get to see many nuances of a story. So you get to see the perspective, not just of the person you're reading, but also maybe the perspective of everybody that's in their circle, So let's say if you're looking at a certain scenario or a certain lifetime, you're not just looking at the hero's perspective, so to speak. You're also looking at the villain or, the other people that this individual might have soul contracts with. So that's where I think some of our human stories here on Earth kind of fall flat. I kind of feel like, as beings that are moving from duality consciousness to more of a integration of consciousness where there's a lot of gray areas. And that's part of what moving into the fourth dimension and fifth dimension is about, is integrating all those different aspects. It could be that we need to move away from this duality thinking. And I think a lot of our human stories, whether it be, Hollywood films or, Disney or whatever, really focus just on that duality aspect.
I always talk about this and always talk about law of attraction. And maybe I don't explain it completely the right way.
Okay.
Because I wrote a book and I use social media to demonstrate the quantum field, because the internet is based off our nervous system and we mirror human behavior on social media. And the only thing that offsets that is the algorithm, which creates balance for the business model of that app. So when I started at the beginning, I said we're operating on two pieces of that puzzle. And I came up with environment, foundation, and sensitivities to kind of simplify that. But those three things align with the perspective of law of attraction. Now, I think law of attraction is, the name kind of throws people off because that it gives you a definition of the response to the environment, a response to the foundation, a response to the sensitivities. What I'm saying is we need to plug in back in this sensitivity part, the esoteric part, the spiritual part, back into the two pieces that we've been operating on for years, which created a realm of physics that's the wrong realm of physics, when the quantum field is the correct realm of physics. And I think what I was getting to about that message is the stories kind of alienate people. And I want to put that message out there because we don't need to be alienating people. I think we need to be speaking from a foundational perspective to bring more people in so we can get this sensitivity piece back in play for humanity and start creating alignment again. What do you think about alignment with what you do and the different perspectives of that?
I see alignment as pretty much all of us returning to our original cosmic blueprint. So part of this, overall soul journey that we're on is we go through this period of separation where we're separating from source, we're separating from our origins, we're separating from everything. Planet Earth is the most separate you can get from source. I mean, because we are living in this 3D reality here. So we go through this period of separation, and then part of our spiritual journey, or a big part of it actually, is to return to unification, oneness, this rejoining of humanity, our cosmic families. Part of, I guess, my mission is to reconnect, people with their cosmic origins or their, I would say star lineage, if you want to call it that, because that's part of their journey of returning to who they truly are, which is, an omnipresent aspect of source. So I think it's just part of this whole cycle that we're in, so I kind of call it like an inverted bell curve where initially we started off, high vibrational, we were part of the source, then we get more and more separated with each incarnation. And now Earth is 0.0. This is the most separated we'll ever be. And then we're moving back towards this unification with not only our oversouls and our, star families, but also with, Source itself. And that could be quite an arduous journey. I mean, it doesn't happen in a lifetime. I think sometimes people think that, they're supposed to get enlightened and then ta-da, everything's all solved and they're, they're back in complete, solidarity and connection, and it's not necessarily the case. I think we go through a multitude of different dimensional aspects of ourselves where we have to integrate that, and that could take lifetimes to do. So part of my small mission here on Earth, if you want to call it that, is just to help people on that journey back to source, in a very small way, but, helping them to reconnect with where they came from. Because once they understand who they are and where they came from, they can move back towards that integration, that oneness. So I always say that it's part of Earth's destiny to become part of the greater galactic family. And that's what we're moving towards. And I'm excited about that. It's going to be an amazing next few years. I keep seeing, more and more evidence that we're going to be connecting with extraterrestrial beings. We've already connected with them, but I mean, on a more open level where everybody knows about it, where it's going to be just this amazing reunion, So I'm excited about that. And, anything I can do to facilitate that process, make it go a little faster, I will do that, so.
It actually makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Because I think that I'm on the opposite end of that.
Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah.
Perspective. And you're I will say you're the rainbow. Your thought process, because of what you're viewing, is setting people up for their rainbow situation. And when I say rainbow, if I'm foundational, my thing is foundation and trying to put the pieces back together that's going to align people here. So if we align here, we're going to get to you quicker.
I agree with that. Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Is what I'm thinking. So yeah, I mean, that's very interesting when you think about that.
No, I like what you said about, you're on the foundational level and I'm at the aspirational level, so I'm trying to set people up, for success as far as their integration with their star journeys, because, that's what I'm about. I'm not so much interested in the Earth journey so much, maybe because I feel like we're moving away from that. But I see what you're saying about, hey, we do need to integrate that Earth aspect of ourselves. And I think as starseeds, sometimes we forget to do that. Like we get so excited about finding out that we're a starseed or that we're a light worker that, maybe we don't want to integrate some of our Earth aspects. And I would say that's probably the reason why a lot of people come to work with me, because, they're trying to move past, their Earth karma or their Earth, the Earth integration process, so, but no, I agree with you. It's very, very important. A lot of times when I do Akashic readings, I'm focusing just as equally long on people's Earth lives, because especially their past Earth lives, because there are certain maybe aspects of those past lives that maybe they do need to integrate, in order to evolve and move forward. So I do a lot of work around that too.
Well, I always say that 99% of the population has a discovery mindset. And wherever we land on that discovery can be a light or dark situation. So we haven't been that intelligent to this point. But if we operate, what I'm saying, I guess, if we operate how we're supposed to based on creation, and you understand creation's alignment, we can get to your answer quicker.
No, I agree.
Because we know the path.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. Totally. Yeah. Because sometimes, people will dismiss Akashic readings as, oh, it's just like a glorified past life regression. It's nothing, nothing phenomenal, or my husband will always say this, like, why do I need to know about my past lives? How is that going to help me in this life? He'll say that sometimes, and I just kind of laugh at him. But I think it's important to understand where we came from. What was our past experiences? Because that's how we learn. So that's how we learn moving beyond that. So what I see sometimes with some of my clients is they'll repeat old patterns a lot, like stuff from past lives. And so I do what's called an Akashic clearing. So I'm helping them to rewrite their story, so to speak. So they're not in this kind of karmic loop, just going over and over again. No, so I appreciate what you're saying. I'm not discounting it whatsoever. I think it's equally as important.
Well, one thing you said too, my thought process is a little different, but maybe you can teach me, maybe I can understand more, because I'm always learning. all the time. And, if creation is one and we are centered, that light or dark only comes from our choice.
No, I would agree.
So really, if we understood our direction, you could stay centered and you wouldn't have light or dark. You could stay centered to who you are, to your light. What is the thought process of the light or dark on both sides? I mean, where did that come from? Because I know the East put that out there. And I think the East had
Eastern philosophy or
Eastern philosophy kind of put that out there. And sometimes I agree or disagree with their thought process. Have you ever thought about that on a deeper level from light or dark? Yin and yang?
Yeah, totally. So we live in a duality consciousness reality. So when Source decided to split off, so this is just my version of the story, and maybe it doesn't resonate with some people, but when Source decided that this universe was going to go through this period of separation, so Source just wanted to have an experience. So I just wanted to split off. And so part of the splitting off was initially the splitting off of the Mother God consciousness and the Father God consciousness. So the duality started off as masculine and feminine. And then it split off even further into light and dark aspects. And so we just keep going on and on with this duality. It's just part of our experience as souls to experience all aspects of this duality. So sometimes souls will choose to have very dark experiences, and there's really, I would say on a higher level, there's no judgment around it, unlike what the Christian faith might teach, like if you do something bad, you're damned to hell, kind of thing. I was raised Catholic, so I read that a lot. But actually on the higher level, it's just an experience, so yes, there are repercussions, with either doing good or doing evil, so there's repercussions on both ends. But then also you have an opportunity to rewrite your story, because we're free will beings, So I just see it as having a multitude of experiences or as being soul shards of Source. So we're all on this journey to have as many experiences as possible in order to help ourselves evolve and move back towards Source. So it's kind of like a big old cycle,
Do we not eliminate those experiences the more centered we become? We can predetermine life. And if we set people up and we set people in the right directions, we're going to eliminate the bad experiences. We're going to eliminate the bad customers. So you're going to have less dark experiences based on your alignment. Maybe the light or dark's just there now to push us back to that alignment.
And I would say ultimately our goal is to become more balanced. So I think you're correct there, but the goal is to become balanced. So I always tell my clients, if I'm looking at their soul field or their auric field, and I say, you're a little unbalanced. You got a lot of masculine energy, not enough feminine, or vice versa. So the goal is to try to become more balanced, so that we can achieve more of that nirvana state, if that's what you're referring to. And that maybe that's why we're here on Earth right now, is because this is the most extreme duality consciousness that we're ever going to experience. And so it gives us an opportunity to really work on that balance, to be really, it's like PhD level work, so if you're in, say, the Pleiades, where, and I'm just using the Pleiades as an example, or Arcturus, where everything is light and is perfect, and you don't have a lot of duality there, then it's going to be difficult to learn to work with that balance, because you're already in a light situation. So I think a lot of us as souls choose to have incarnations on Earth in order to experience dark and to be able to work on strengthening that balance within us, so.
I had this experience with a low-level entity that I was able to remove from my cousin accidentally, just because I innately knew what to do.
Yeah.
And when you think about that, and you think about dark, now I think there's a certain type of person that can go so dark that they're never coming back to this alignment ever. This soul is not coming back to this alignment. They went dark. Would you consider them a reptilian type species? Because I've heard this narrative a couple different ways. there's the dragons, there's the reptilians. So would you consider that the evolution of reptilians? If it is that person that can never come back to the dark in whatever civilization they're in?
That's an interesting question. I've seen even star seeds from the Pleiades that have gone so dark that they're never coming back, so it's not just reptilians. And I'm the first person to say that there's also positive reptilian beings, so not all reptilians are evil. I get a lot of heat for saying that because, I think a lot of people like to categorize these beings as one thing or another, but in actuality, there's some very dark Pleiadians. There's light Pleiadians. There's a lot of very dark reptilians, but there's also positive oriented or benevolent reptilian beings, So as far as souls that go so far dark, that's through a series of choices that they've made. I recently did a celebrity reading on P. Diddy, and some, people that are interested in that can check it out. It's on my YouTube channel. It's a recent video, so you should be able to find it pretty easily. But one of the things I saw with his soul was that even though he went through a lot of trauma, in his previous lifetimes, he kept choosing to respond to that trauma with darkness rather than rising above it. So when you make enough of these choices to stay within the dark, you're going to be in the dark for a while. I mean, there's always a chance for redemption, but there's some souls that, I don't see redemption happening in this lifetime. And P. Diddy was one of those souls,
Mm-hmm.
He just did too much dark, and it's hard to come back from that in one lifetime. I mean, unless you do some major, major healing, you just, really transform yourself, which I don't think he's self-aware enough to do that, personally, but that would take an extraordinary soul.
When you think about that, I mean, this is what pops in my head.
Yeah.
When you think about law of attraction, when you think about environment, when you think about foundation, when you think about sensitivities, I had this understanding that sometimes people with a lot of money, they go in, taking New York City, because I lived in North Caldwell, New Jersey for many years. These guys will go into the city, they go work, they come to the country club, they play golf, and they do that for 40 years. They walk into that country club, everybody kisses their ass. Everybody agrees with what they say. That's a big environmental piece that can blind you, because I think sometimes those people become, even though they have all this money, they become naive to society.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, they're living in their little rich person bubble, so.
Yeah, that would make a lot of sense, because if P. Diddy only experiences this environment and everybody's telling him they love him, he's the greatest thing since sliced bread.
Totally.
He doesn't know how to make any other type of decisions.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, but that's on a higher soul level. Maybe he chose that, so, so that's the thing that, I keep looking at is, why do you keep choosing these same types of experiences? Because your higher self is choosing that for whatever reason. And maybe, so the backward way of looking at it, and this is something I've thought about too, looking at P. Diddy's Akashic records, is that maybe in doing all of this darkness, and it's pretty dark, some of the stuff he did, it's pretty bad. Okay. I don't think we need to go into detail, but maybe in a way it's for the highest good, because it's going to awaken a lot of people. So him getting arrested, the opportunity for maybe the P. Diddy lists coming out, maybe it's the crumbling of Hollywood as we see it. Maybe in the long run, there's a silver lining to this, that it's going to awaken a lot of people to what's really going on this planet. So it's going to disintegrate, some of these old systems that are currently that have been in place, for, I would say, at least, decades, if not, thousands of years. So maybe in a way, him doing the bad things that he's doing, is going to lead to some goodness down the road, in kind of a backhanded sort of way. I mean, it's kind of sad that, there was a lot of unwilling souls that got caught up with that, and maybe that was, part of their learning and journey. But, I oftentimes think that, well, there's this, maybe there's a silver lining to the negativity, because Because it gets so extreme, so like in P. Diddy's case, he's a really extreme example, but it gets so extreme that people can't help but notice, rather than it being swept under the rug. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it creates a stopping point
Yeah.
of darkness.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
And before I get into how you do what you do, when you think about differences and you think about light or dark
Mm-hmm.
and directional pieces of the puzzle, how did you tap into this information? How did you get your alignment with what you're doing today? Because, like with me, I've read one book and half the Bible, and I have all this information in my head all of a sudden. Did this, for you, kind of like an epiphany moment? Was there alignment for you? Was there a direction for you? What changed to make you understand what you're doing today?
I'll give you the abridged version of that because I know we only have an hour, but I'll give you the short version. So basically what happened with me is I was a very unawakened soul for, I'll say, the first half of my life, so I had a religious upbringing, I was brought up Roman Catholic, so I had some understanding of spirituality on a very limited level, if you want to call it that. But I was very 3D. I'm a Navy veteran, so I was in the Navy for 6 years. I worked for the public health department in Colorado Springs for quite a few years, so, and I even worked in the IT field for a while, so very much in the kind of governmental corporate world. I think how things evolved for me was a series of events. And maybe it was predestined by my higher self that eventually I was going to awaken. But I would say the first part of my awakening started when I decided that I was going to start being of service to others. So I did animal assisted therapy work voluntarily for 6 years with my therapy animal. And that got me out of this kind of selfish notion of myself. So I started seeing the world in a bigger light. And then through the interactions with my husband, at the time I was dating him, he was very interested in the paranormal. And I started reading up more about it because of his interests, and it expanded my consciousness. And then I had my extraterrestrial contact experience in 2012. I would say that experience was what totally changed the trajectory of my life, because at that point I knew things were never going to be the same, at that point. So in that experience, I was brought on board an extraterrestrial starship. I interacted with Arcturian beings from Arcturus and learned about myself, learned who I truly was. And I just knew and then they answered a lot of my questions about reality, what was going on planet Earth. So I would say I went to sleep that night being totally asleep, and then I woke up being awakened, like truly awakened. And then at that point, I was starting to get downloads, so I was getting downloads of galactic information, of spiritual information about star systems. And I didn't know at first where this information was coming from. You go through this period where you doubt yourself and you think you're going crazy. And then I started realizing, this is a connection with the Akashic records, that I'm connecting with this higher level information, and I'm downloading it because I'm supposed to be sharing it, supposed to be teaching it, So that's kind of in a nutshell how it happened for me. It was very kind of dramatic, so it wasn't like this gradual awakening that a lot of people go through. To me, it was almost like, one night I was asleep, and one night it was like, oh, now I know what's going on, or at least I know more of the bigger picture, So I think it's different for different people. A lot of people awaken when they have a near-death experience, or they have some sort of spiritual awakening. So there's a multitude of ways that you can awaken. And for some people, it's very gradual. It's like they always kind of have an interest, and then they get to a period of their life where they start asking questions or start, trying to wonder what's really happening behind the scenes, and they do a deep dive on that. So it's different for different people, but it all leads us to the same place, ultimately.
So are you ancient, Arcturian, and Palladian hybrid?
I would say that I'm a very old soul.
Stuff pops in my head. I don't know if it's true or not, but very, very old.
Yeah, no, I would say I'm pretty old. I've seen my Akashic records, so I know.
Really?
Yeah, oh yeah, that's part of learning to read the Akashic records, and that's what I teach my students is if you can't read yourself, how are you going to read other people? You got to read yourself, and it's hard to read yourself. I think you got to put the judgments aside, I think sometimes this is hard to look at ourselves. It's really hard to look at maybe some lifetimes where we made some really bad choices, or even some lifetimes where we went through trauma, where it was just, a lot of trauma. But no, I've seen my records. I know how old, I don't know the exact date, but yeah, I would say I'm very, very ancient. Yeah.
Because I can see it in your eyes.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. That's to me, that's a compliment. Thank you so much.
The other rationale I had, interviewed R.L. Poole.
Yeah.
And he's got about a 160 IQ. And thinking about that and thinking about how he has been abducted his whole life from a child till now. And my thought process was, if you are part of that civilization, these aliens, UFOs, or whatever you want to call them, are only going to mess with their civilization because they're like a guinea pig here. And they're trying to they're trying to recreate divine. Why do we take an absolute narrative publicly and not start trying to explain that piece? Because the media puts out this absolute, which absolutes don't work, and they think everybody's effective. But do you believe that they're only going to mess with the civilization they're connected to? UFOs come down and so forth?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I would. That's why, we don't have interactions with tens of thousands of beings, like there's probably tens of thousands of species of beings in this galaxy alone. But the beings that are directly, I think, connected with Earth are the ones that are visiting Earth or are involved with planet Earth. So that's why we see the same species of beings being mentioned over and over again, So I always talk about where there's at least 22 species of beings that seeded planet Earth. It might be even more than that, but 22 was a number that I saw in the records. So yeah, the beings that are directly involved with planet Earth, that have a vested interest in this planet, are the ones that are involved. So that's why when I do Akashic readings for folks that have starseed origins, I don't see like some weird place. Rarely, occasionally I might see some weird off beaten place like in some other universe, but more often than not, most of them are from those founder races that seeded the DNA here on planet Earth. So because they have a vested interest in this planet.
I had a guy on that interpreted the Theoba prophecy.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah.
The Theoba prophecy says there's 53. Do you think these are just, if you look at the functionality of the four corners of the world, I have this information that the Broad River was one of the rivers that fed Atlantis. And Atlantis would have been, the way it was structured pre-flood, would have been right in the middle or the four quadrants of Earth. So that would make sense that four rivers from each of the four quadrants would flow in. Do you think they've done this same structure? Because I go back 4.6 billion years ago. I can prove what science has discovered of why structurally we are what we are. Like the Blue Ridge Mountains is one of the most developed areas. 4.6, during the Precambrian era, which is 4.6 billion years ago. Atlantis is supposedly, 13,000 years ago or something? So these civilizations that are around, and God has done this before, do you think the same structure was done here? Where they've done this multiple times and each civilization has moved on and now they're trying to come back because each time they've improved, now they're trying to come back to figure out how they can reap the rewards of improvement?
Yeah, totally. I think that's part of the soul journey that I was talking about. So I believe that, we have civilizations come and go because they all go through this cycle, so they go through, this cycle of coming into the heyday the I would say the apex of their civilization, and then there's always this gradual decline. And we've seen this over and over again, not just here on Earth, but also off planet. So I mean, there's exceptions to that, but I would say for the most part, we saw it with the Lyra Draconian Wars. We saw it with some of the civilizations in Sirius. We've seen it with Orion. So this is kind of part of the human story. So I think sometimes there are certain civilizations that choose to come back in order to rewrite their story. Maybe it's kind of like when people individually have an incarnation, and they might choose to have an experience similar to something they experienced in the past in this lifetime in order to rewrite their story a little better. So maybe they decide, hey, in the past life, I got killed by this person. In this life, I'm going to choose to walk away from them. But it does become more of a, I would say, a cyclical experience. And so that's why we see civilizations like the Mayans, in Mexico, that, they had this thriving civilization and then they just disappeared. It's like, where did they go? Did they get assimilated? I don't believe they got assimilated totally in the Spanish conquest. I think a lot of them ascended. Same with the Etruscans, same with some of the other civilizations, some of the Eastern European civilizations that, were ancient, that built the pyramids, in that part of the world. So, where do these people, where do they go to? I kind of don't want to believe that they just got assimilated, that there was a process of ascension. And some people say that, the Anunnaki or the Nibiru, the people from the planet Nibiru are coming back. I don't know if that's true or not. I'm inclined to say probably not, but they played a part in our history as well. So that was the group that actually, I would say, did a lot of manipulation of the human genome, and not for the better. So they're trying to create this slave race, and they succeeded. They did a lot of damage for a while, but we're working beyond that now. So even in the human genome, there's some limitations. We were supposed to be 12-strand DNA. That was the original intention for the human genome. And now we're at 2 strands. We're still at 2 strands. So a lot of it just makes ascension harder, I guess. And maybe that was purposeful to stretch out this period of ascension. I don't know, but
here's the theory on that is,
okay.
All right, let's go back to law of attraction. We got environment. We're going to teach everybody about our environment. And then there's your foundation, which is your non-conscious. You're a non-conscious being. If they disrupt the DNA and they disrupt the calendar, then those directions may be off a little bit, right? So people don't realize that just by our birth date alone, we can align humanity the right way. And this is part of the thing about eliminating the bad customer, eliminating opportunities for trauma, because you're aligned with your relationship, you're aligned with your success, you're aligned with health. So if they take and that's kind of based off a DNA model, if you think about the 4 pillars in feng shui. So if when I came up with this and I said, this is how we reset humanity, they said, what do you do about the calendar moving? I said, well, if the 4 pillars are based on someone's DNA, which is their birth date, right? Let's reverse engineer their DNA and we can find out exactly when their date should be based on the astronomy of the universe.
Well, there's been, manipulation of the calendar, so now we're talking about going back to a 13-month calendar, which is what it was always supposed to be, whereas 13 months, 28 days, so it's more equal. There's also the manipulation of astrology, so people were talking about how Vedic astrology is more accurate. I mean, I don't know if it is or not. I'm not an astrologer, but there's been manipulation of human systems for millennia. And I think a lot of that was designed to keep us off course. It's like the powers to be on this planet keep creating all these obstacle courses, for us to kind of overcome. So I think a lot of us, like you and me, we're just trying to find the truth behind everything. It's like, well, what's the truth? What is really what's going on? What is it that is being hidden from us, and why is it being hidden? I always thought it was interesting. I was, like I mentioned a couple of times, I was raised Catholic, and one of the things I was taught coming from a devout Catholic family was that astrology and the occult were evil, was like witchcraft. You weren't supposed to mess with that stuff. To me, it's just a system, so it's a system of being able to predict, what could happen, or even being tuned into a certain symbology, could help guide us, through, I would say the navigating through this planet. And so why did the powers to be didn't want us to work with those systems? I always ask that question. A lot of people don't know this, but I've been reading tarot cards since I was in my 20s, and I never felt anything evil about it. And I even worked with Alex Crowley deck, which a lot of people say is demonic, but it's just a series of symbols. Yeah, there's light symbols, there's dark symbols, but this is all part of the human experience, so why demonize it? Same with astrology. It's just a certain energies or certain frequencies that are in place during certain times of the year. That's what, astrology represents. And this is something I saw in the records, which a lot of people don't talk about, but the actual zodiac wheel. So the zodiac wheel pretty much is the backbone of this galaxy. So why would we demonize something that is part of the backbone of this galaxy? Why would we say that it's evil? Limit, people's access to this information because it could help them guide themselves out of being stuck, out of being stuck in this matrix, if you want to call it that. So the Akashic records are the same way. I think, it was taught for a long time that only certain people can have access to this information, off limits to everybody else. And I'm here to tell people that anybody can access the Akashic records. Anybody. You don't have to have a special password. You don't have to have special abilities. You just have to practice. You just have to really learn to open up your third eye, develop your psychic abilities, and anybody can access the Akashic records. I'm just kind of the forerunner of it, maybe. I don't know, maybe myself and other people that do read the records. Yeah.
It's the age thing. That's a foundational thing. It's just,
totally. Yeah.
Just like one of the natives would stay in those areas that were the most developed at the beginning of creation. There's 4 areas in the U.S., the Blue Ridge Mountains, Michigan, and the Niagara Falls area, and then Montana, and that area over there with the Sauk tribes, and then Lake Mead and all that. And each of those areas had very similar things happen.
Yeah.
Which was very, very interesting. So if you were going to read my records, how would you read my records? What would you think about mine?
All I need is your name and your birth date. And then I go through a little process. Honestly, I don't even need to go through the process anymore, but I do it. Just to kind of establish some formality to the process. But yeah, I just need your name and birth date.
You want to see what it is? Does it take long?
It could take as long or as short as you want. Since we're limited on time, I would say maybe we'll just do a few minutes. But
okay. So
you're John Edmonds Kozma. Okay.
Kozma. John Edmonds Kozma. Kozma. And my birth date is 1/25/72.
72. Now let me check in. So I'm not going to go through the whole prayer process because we don't have that kind of time because that takes a few minutes. So I'm just going to tune in. Okay. So I do see Andromeda Galaxy. So you're one of those wingmaker beings from Andromeda Galaxy. So you're a co-creator being. So you're very ancient as well. If you have a connection with Andromeda, and particularly the galaxy, that I would say that's probably pretty ancient. So we're talking billions of years old. I do see part of your mission was to establish stability of frequency throughout, I would say, different there's And so your particular soul group, and you're kind of like a specialized group from the Andromeda group. So there's the Oversoul, the Andromeda Galaxy Oversoul group, but then you're more of a specialized version. So you're more of this wingmaker being So your true form is like this light body that has wings, so maybe kind of angelic looking, but not necessarily human. Okay, so this is etheric form. And then what I'm seeing with you is that your group had a specialized mission as far as developing the Milky Way. So part of that specialized mission was to establish stability points throughout the galaxy. So your group came in through the Antares Stargate, which is Antares is the Stargate of Souls. It's actually Arcturus is the Stargate of Souls. Antares is the Stargate that is the portal between Andromeda Galaxy and the Milky Way. So what I'm seeing is also some incarnations where you have kind of a gatekeeper quality. So there was a couple of incarnations where you incarnated as like a mantis being. I know that sounds crazy, but we've been a lot of different things throughout a multitude of lifetimes. So we weren't always human. And so there was this gatekeeper quality. And I think that was established in order to protect this new galaxy. Then I'm seeing that you were part of some councils in the Galactic Center, which is between Scorpio and Sagittarius. But then I don't see so much of a connection with Lyra. What I see is you're always this soul that works on really specialized projects. And honestly, you didn't have a whole lot of physical incarnations. So a lot of times you were working behind the scenes more as an etheric being, as a light body. But then you decided at some point that you had to get more physically involved with the, pretty much this whole experience that we're all having, collectively as souls that have chosen to have this experience in this particular galaxy. So you chose at some point that, hey, I need to have more physical incarnations because I need to have more hands-on. I think your comfort level, honestly, is you would prefer to be more hands-off, but because I think things were getting a little stagnant in certain areas, particularly here on Earth, you decided, I need to incarnate in more physical form. So your initial physical incarnation was in Sirius. You're very connected with the Syrian mystery schools. You probably taught at those schools. You probably know the ascended masters, quite intimately, just as colleagues rather than as guides to look up to. And then I'm seeing incarnations also in Andromeda constellation. So I would say mostly Syrian and Andromedan, incarnations. I see some Pleiades also here and there, like Electra. I see Taygeta, Electra. You're very much Father God consciousness oriented. So you're all about information, not about so much healing or, more the feminine aspects. So I would say you're more informational. You're more like a whistleblower, truth teller kind of soul. And I think that's part of your mission right now. Establish truth at a deeper level. On planet Earth, you had a few incarnations. I know you told me that you felt that you had a connection with, who was the individual? I'm trying to think of it now.
I was told John the Baptist.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, that's part of your connection with Sirius. Okay. So John the Baptist is part of your soul group. And so you probably had an incarnation where you're either an aspect of that soul group or part of that soul group. So I'm seeing I don't know if you incarnated as this individual or you were there to support him, so to speak, or part of his family. I think you were part of his family, actually, but you were there to establish his role in spreading the truth. And because that's ultimately your mission, is to bring us back to the the core level truth of what's really happening on this planet. I can go a lot deeper into things, but I'm going to wrap it up.
That's
So
cool. That's a lot.
yeah, so I'm going to wrap it up, but you had a long journey getting here. And what I see with you is that you didn't have like a lot of physical incarnations on Earth. You really kind of handpicked the type of incarnations you had. I do see Native American incarnations. I think that's a tribute to your Native American genetics. I do see lifetimes in ancient Bosnia or ancient Eastern Europe. So there was something that you were doing with the energetic fields there. I keep seeing pyramids, but not the Egyptian pyramids. I'm seeing even pyramids that were even more ancient than those at Giza, so there was some deep level work that you were doing. This was like ancient times, like around, like maybe right after Atlantis, As far as Atlantis was concerned, I do think you have more of a connection with Atlantis than with Lemuria. I want to say that as far as your incarnation in Atlantis, you came in during kind of the downfall of Atlantis. So your incarnation was during the time when Atlantis was starting to get corrupted, and your mission was to try to bring the Atlanteans back to a spiritual balance, but they were too far gone. So I think that's why you get a little frustrated with the way things are now here, where people are just not willing to take a broader view of things. They're so kind of pigeonholed on materialistic kind of bullshit reality type of stuff, because you saw what happened to Atlantis and you're trying to prevent that from happening now. So this is part of your hero's journey, is to try to spread the truth enough to where people will start to take note. And maybe in that past Atlantean life, you didn't have the opportunity to do that, or you were squashed. So you were prevented from doing that. So nowadays there's a lot more freedom, to share our truth. We could still get shut down, but we're still out there. I mean, they tried to shut us down. We're still out. We're still doing our thing, So,
Yeah.
so that's what you're doing.
Funny you say that about the pyramids, because at Lake Lure,
Mm-hmm.
I found, 2 river quadrants with a granite monolith right in the center, and the broad river starting at the Intercontinental Divide.
Mm-hmm.
And these mountains are like showing themselves to me, like finding faces on the mountains. To me, the way these rocks look, I mean, these rocks up there in this area, Lake Lure, North Carolina, they say they're like 3 billion years old.
Oh, yeah, I believe that. Yeah. That's why there's a lot of energy. I do think the next spiritual awakening area is going to be the South, particularly North Carolina, but maybe even Tennessee or Kentucky or some of those. Not so much the deep South, but more those central southern states, because there's a lot of vortexes in that area. And they're ancient, so it's very, very ancient. There's probably some star portals there too that are going to be opening.
Well, I did some work at the light. I did some energy. I have scalar energy. I told you that, right?
Yeah,
I have
you told
scalar
me
energy
that.
coming out of my hands.
Yeah.
I went up to the light center where there's supposedly a vortex, and my brother, whenever we had seizures.
Yeah.
October last year. When I was there, when I put my hand over his crown chakra, stuff started pouring out his nose, his ears immediately. He could only handle it for about 5 minutes. He had to stop.
Mm.
He was about 275 in October, September last year.
Mm.
Now he's down to about 205.
Nice. Wow.
And he hasn't had any more seizures.
Wow, amazing.
So I'm trying to figure out what I'm supposed to be doing with that piece of the puzzle. When you kicked in and started talking about this, there was instant flow coming out of my hand.
Oh, cool. Well, here's the deal with your scalar energy, is that you're a wing maker. You're an Andromeda Galaxy being. So Andromeda Galaxy beings are masters of manipulating frequency. Your healing gifts actually come directly from source. It's not like you have to use symbols like, they do with Reiki, or you have to get the frequency from another, another source. You channel that in directly from source. So that's why it's so powerful. So I do think maybe you're meant to do work with that. I don't know if you're going to be doing massive grid work with that energy, or if you're going to do one-on-one work with people, maybe a little bit of both, but I would explore for that. But your frequency is coming directly from Andromeda Galaxy and directly from Source. So that's why it is as powerful, and why, I would say you have a massive impact on, the individuals you work with this frequency. And it is an unusual quality. I've only met a handful of other people that have the same level of healing abilities that you have. And I would say the vast majority of them are Andromeda Galaxy souls.
Thank you for that information.
Yeah,
I appreciate that.
No, I'm really happy to share that. Because you're an amazing soul, and you're here with a big mission. Yeah, so I just want to close the records really fast, so let me do that. I just want to, because we never want to leave the records open. So let me do that real quick. So your energy goes with you, and my energy stays with me. So
awesome.
The records are closed. So that's how I do it. I just kind of tune into the records, and it just kind of channels through. A lot of times I see images, so a lot of people ask me, so how do you get this information? And I see images. The guides will tell me some things, the Akashic guides. And then, so there's a clairaudient quality, a clairvoyant, and also a clairsentience quality. And sometimes you hear music. Sometimes you feel feelings. Like I could feel your frustration in Atlantis, so it's a multi-level kind of reading.
Well, my body tingles all the time.
Yeah.
It feels like I'm being, like, just stuff will come through and it's just like a wave.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I said, you don't feel like, I asked my wife, I said, you don't feel like that? And she's like, no. It's almost like you have a cold chills, but you're not sick.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, like you get goosebumps, Yeah.
Well, I think this has been a great show, and hopefully people can learn from this. And
you
I appreciate
asked really
coming
good
on the
questions.
show.
Thank you, because you didn't ask the normal questions. I was like, yes, he's asking me some interesting questions. So I appreciate that. Thanks.
I think that goes back to the stories and how they're told.
Yeah.
If you rationalize it the right way, this whole circumstance of spirituality is not that woo-woo.
No, not really. It's science-based.
It's science-based. And the other thing, and before we jump off here, and you can give your information of how we find you.
Yeah.
But I came up with this process of creation of 4.
Mm-hmm.
The number 4 is creation in the Bible. Creation started with God with 4 powers to our pineal gland. And I can show you the 4s, how everything aligns by 4 all the way to the human body. And then the bone in our head and the pineal gland that has a slant. That slanted bone on a flat surface is a 1/4 slant. I've written all this out, like from, the 4 powers. He created with 4 powers. The universe is in 4 parts. Then you go to the planetary system. There's 4 terrestrial planets. In some reason, I had this alignment that the sun's the root chakra. Mercury, Venus is these 2 chakras here. The earth is the heart chakra. Mars is the throat chakra. The third eye is the moon. That's why nobody will ever be able to land there, because it's very protected.
Mm-hmm.
And then the crown chakra is Pluto.
Mm-hmm.
Now go to Earth. Inner core, outer core, mantle, crust. There's 4 directions. You have 4 parts to your brain, 4 parts to your heart. You're made of 4 humors. There's 4 gases.
There's 4 elements.
4 elements, and on and on and on.
There's 4 royal stars. So there you go.
And then you go back to creation, because like creation is the pillar of 4, like human life is here.
Mm-hmm.
And that pillar of 4, if you align that pillar of 4 the right way, and then you streamline it through the melding block of humanity and life, which is law of attraction, that's perfect alignment to reset humanity. That's what I'm trying to get people to understand. And
that's the energy you worked with in the galaxy initially, was the stability. So 4 is a stability number.
Interesting.
Yeah. So it's all connected. That's what I love about doing this work, is that you just see synchronicity after synchronicity after synchronicity when you look at people's stories and see, their soul journeys and where they came from, so what a beautiful journey you had, and you're still writing your story. So
wow.
Yeah. So I'm excited to see what you might do next.
Well, I appreciate that, Debbie. I appreciate that.
So
how do we find you and find your great work that you do?
Well, thank you. Well, people can mainly find me through my website. So I'm just debbiesolaris.com, just like you see on the screen here. You can find a big section on galactic history and information about different star races, at least the ones that are connected with Earth. And I'm going to add more star systems. I'm just in that process. And then I also do quite a few events, so both online and in person. So if you go to the events page of my website, you can see what events I'll be involved with. We're still adding more as we speak. I also offer little trainings. So I do offer a Galactic Akashic reading training that we're going to be offering in September. So if you're interested in learning to do what I do, you can sign up for that wait list. As far as readings, I still do personal readings, but I got to be honest, my wait list is super long. So you're welcome to, to reach out to my staff and ask to be put on the list, but it might be a long wait. And then last but not least, you can find me on the usual social media platforms. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Just search for Debbie Solaris and you'll find me.
I'm blown away. I found out who I am. I think that will enhance a lot. I appreciate that.
No, it's I'm happy to do that. Thank you for the opportunity.
And hope everybody enjoyed this show and hope everybody learned something. This has been Debbie Solaris. I'm John Edmonds Kozma, CEO of Bang Productions, owner of the TikTok Live Creator Network Agency, and host of the Unimpressed Podcast. We'll see you next time.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.